What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are here with some more MMA DFS picks for DraftKings and FanDuel. This time for UFC 298, Alexander Volkonovski, Ilia Topuria. Excellent matchup with 12 fights. We're here to give you our picks, best bets, lineup construction tips, all the strategies you need for UFC 298. Welcome. I am Brian Juster, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. Jake, after some chaos this morning, we are recording this Friday evening. We made it to Friday night with 12 fights on the card somehow still. What's up, man? How you doing?
Good man. Yeah, we swapped out Tafas today. Easy, seamless transition.
The rare brother for brother swap on fight day with like 20 minutes to spare. We'll get into all that. Our plan for this video, if you are new to our UFC DFS videos, many of you have seen our football videos. Some of you have never seen any of our videos. What we're going to do in this particular UFC breakdown is discuss the main event between Alexander Volkanovski, Ilia Topuria, what it means for betting in DFS. We will analyze the 5 newcomers. Yes, despite just 12 fights, we have 12. Despite 12 fights, we have five fighters who are making their UFC debut. We have a bunch of other fighters who have just a couple of fights in the octagon. We will give some context to their stats as well. And then at the end, we will give our favorite underdog fantasy play of the week, our fight that you have to target in DFS. Whoever wins is likely to score well, and our stream parlay of the week. We almost hit 2 in a row last week. Jake, before we get into the main event, let's just talk about when we have these pay-per-view events, we like to talk about the dynamics of the slate. We have 12 fights. That makes it extremely difficult to get different compared to 13 and 14 fight cards. It also makes it difficult when you have 2 extremely high ceiling, high floor DFS plays in the main event, priced at $8,200 and $8K respectively on DraftKings. And then, as we alluded to, the Tafa fiasco. Justin Tafa dropped out. His brother Junior Tafa stepped in. As a result, we get a slight mispricing with Rogerio de Lima at 8,500. His money line has bounced around. Honestly, not as high as we thought it would get to, but he's a little underpriced at 8,500 now. They slotted in Junior Tafa at $7,600. So, given all that we know, Jake, what is your advice for people who are playing larger contests, playing smaller contests, just on how to get different on the slate? And we haven't even mentioned the amount of fighters that have very high ceilings that are going to be high owned as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely harder. We've got only 12 fights, as you talked about. We've got 5 fighters over 35% owned, and, 4 guys over 40% owned, of the 24 fighters on the card. So I think right off the bat, you're going to see the chalkiest lineups are going to go main event and then try to jam Dvalishvili, Fluffy Hernandez, and Nakamura. So, definitely if you want to avoid like the most duped lines, definitely don't do that. And I would say only include one of Dvalishvili, Hernandez, Nakamura if you're playing the main event. Don't even go two. Because if you play 3 of these high owned guys, you're automatically going to, it's just, there's so few combinations. You're going to be really looking at double digit dupes, if not like 50 plus dupes on some of these lineups if you get really chalky. So I think the best way right off the bat is just say, okay, I'm going to go a main event fighter because, like you said, they're priced so cheaply. It's really hard for that to get left out, but it's easier for some of these other fights to get left out. So if you only go one to Dvalishvili, Hernandez, Nakamura, I think that's a great start for reducing dupes.
And to that point, that is for the largest GPPs, 20 max and 150 max. I was curious, Jake. I reviewed I always review my stuff, my results, and I was looking back at 2023 where I didn't have any large field wins. And you and we thought that maybe a lot of the lack of large field success was due to the smaller slate size we had. But I was looking, I still had great success in small field, 200 players or less, even on these 11 fight cards. And the reason being just knowing how small field works and looking back at the results, the ownership gets even more barbell distributed to where we have the higher owned guys get even higher, the lower owned gets even lower, and even the mid tier guys get squeezed out a little bit. And so when you only need one lower owned fighter and you don't have to get that different in small field, it makes it a lot easier. Those lineups are much easier to build than trying to galaxy brain some unique or almost unique large field lineups.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, man. Yeah, I mean, what are the odds that you're like, okay, to get unique, I'm going to go Carlos Vera, Robert Whitaker, like combining some of these guys. It gets real thin if you're trying to play multiple of these low owned plays in the large field contest.
It really does. So now let's transition to the main event: Volk versus Topuria. roughly a coin flip. Money has moved back in Volk's favor this week. Jake, I know you're on Volk early, and we had a great discussion. We probably should have recorded it before we went live here, where we were just discussing why I like Topuria a bit, maybe in line with the market. You like Volk a lot more. All the dynamics here, but again, we can be kind of brief here. But what are your thoughts on how this fight plays out? How is the ownership going to look collectively and for each individual fighter? Let's think about this from DraftKings and a FanDuel perspective, and what it means for high risk contests and even low risk contests.
Yeah, so I think the big talking points this week with Volkanovski are his age. He's 35 years old, and he's 4 months removed from the knockout loss to Makhachev up at 155 pounds. So those are kind of the two knocks on him that everyone's pointing out. They're kind of wondering, oh, is this the end? Is the run over? I just don't really see it, man. I mean, I'll cut the guy a break. He took the fight on like 11 days notice, coming off surgery, just had a baby, said he wasn't even in camp. He was just like hanging out, drinking basically. And yeah, he got caught by a taller, bigger, like powerful guy. Like Bulk didn't even look like he was in that great shape for the fight. He gets head kicked in round one. He didn't like go out cold, but I mean, he got knocked out. But I'm willing to, just cut him a break on that and say that those things happen. Like he's 6-0 in UFC featherweight title fights. He's never lost a 145-pound fight in his entire career. He just has the two losses to Makhachev and a knockout loss early in his career at 170 pounds, but undefeated at 145. And like he's so good at 145, he got bored beating up on guys there and literally had to go up to 155 to even get a competitive fight. I mean, he's just been dominating everyone in this division, and it's just crazy how like the narrative changes in a 4 month window, between before the last Makhachev fight, where everyone was like, "Oh, well, I don't know, Volk might have won that first Makhachev fight," and a lot of people were picking him to win the second one, even on short notice. And now people are like, "Oh, well, he might be washed up. I don't know. This young guy might come in and take his crown." It's wild to me how much things can change over a fight that lasted like 2 minutes back in October, and suddenly just no one has confidence in this guy. I still think he's by far the best 145-pound fighter in the world. In terms of DFS, in his sixth featherweight title fight wins, he's averaged 119 DraftKings points, scoring 114 or more in the last four. He's topped like 133 in three of those four, just dominating in all of these fights. And it just seems like, honestly, I would say it has seemed like he has been getting better in every 145-pound fight. Like if you go back to the original Max Holloway fights and you just look at him building, it just seems like he just keeps getting better and more dominant and more impressive. He does a great job of just weaponizing his cardio. Like he's good everywhere. He can take you down and beat you up. He can beat you up on the feet, but he can just go forever. And he showed against Brian Ortega that he's basically unstoppable. He's just so strong everywhere that it's hard for me to look at a guy that gets a title shot. You look at Topuria's last three fights: Jai Herbert, Bryce Mitchell, Josh Emmett. I just don't see how that equates to beating the best featherweight maybe ever, but clearly right now in the world. So I don't really see it. I see a lot of recency bias going on here on both sides. Ilia Topuria coming off a career best fight against Josh Emmett, and yeah, he went 5 rounds. It was the first time he'd ever seen the championship rounds, but he was dictating the pace the entire fight. He didn't even try to wrestle until the fifth round, and I think because he was trying to preserve his cardio. No, Josh Emmett is not a volume guy. Josh Emmett's a power puncher who's not going to look to wrestle. He's just looking to land big shots. Topuria stayed out of danger, showed off his boxing, and showed he could go 5 rounds, but only when he can dictate the pace. Because the one other time that Topuria has seen the third round his entire career was in his short notice UFC debut. It was short notice, but he completely gassed out in the third round after wrestling with Yusuf Zalal for 2 rounds. And he had Yusuf in so many tight submissions, but he couldn't finish any of them. So, you can't finish Yusuf, I just don't know if you're going to be able to finish Volk. But, I guess he's talking about trying to knock him out. I don't know, man. It just seems like Topuria's being overvalued, Volk's being undervalued. I'm just trying to ignore what happened in their last fights, or at least not overemphasize those results and just look at, their last handful of fights. It just seems like Volk's on a different level than this guy. I just think Volk's going to be able to take him into deep waters, wear him out. By rounds 3 or 4, I think Topuria is going to be gassed, and Volk can get him on the mat and probably get him out of there with ground and pound, put up another big score. And if I'm wrong, and Topuria does finish him, then obviously at 8K on DraftKings, it's hard to see him getting left out of winning lineups. So, I get playing both sides if you want to. That's what the field is doing, though. So all you'd be doing is matching the field by doing that. So I think I'm going to be more looking to take a stand here and going way over on Volk and way under on Topuria. I haven't built all my lineups yet, but that's sort of my initial thinking. It should be a good fight, though, man. I mean, I'm looking forward to it, but yeah, I think Volk's the play here.
And what about low risk contests? 50-50s, double ups, head to heads. This seems like the prototypical stack the main event spot on DraftKings. I haven't looked at it on FanDuel and their pricing, but it seems prototypical for the weight class and these two
For
guys' volume.
sure. Absolutely, man. This is definitely like we. I feel like we're normally talking about like why you shouldn't stack fights. Like this is the fight you want to stack. It's a little bit tougher on FanDuel, where I think the combined price is $37. I think they're 19 and 18, if I have that right. So it's tougher, but I still think you can do it. I don't think you have to, but I think you definitely can. I don't just based on the way there's some cheaper value and there's some expensive guys. I don't think you necessarily have to play on FanDuel. So I don't hate stacking on FanDuel, but it is tougher price wise to do it on FanDuel than on DraftKings.
It is for sure. And so, what's the projected ownership you have right now on these guys for DraftKings?
So right now we have Volk at 51% and Topuria at 43. If the odds come back down, if we get some more money coming on Topuria, I could see his ownership going slightly up. But I mean, the combined ownership is going to be like in the mid 90s, which is rare for a main event to get that high. Normally a high one is like in the mid 80s. And then we'll occasionally get these just crazy ones that people feel like they have to play. And I think this is one of those.
So, you know me, Jake, the contrarian GPP player. 94% combined ownership, right? I mean, there are ways this gets left out, right? Obviously, we talk about all the various with like the nefarious ways. We have eye pokes, we have no contest. God forbid this fight gets canceled post lock somehow. But then you also have mid round KOs, lower volume than expected, super high scoring slate, right? You can't tell me that 6% is the chance of that happening. So I think if you don't take a stand like you're suggesting, which I think is a very fine play in its own right, I think you have no choice but to be underweight if you're playing large field GPPs. You can get your exposure small field GPPs. Yes, play every single lineup outside of large field GPPs with a main event fighter. I mean, when the field is too confident in one thing, we have to go the other way for larger contests, especially on a slate where we're looking to get different. It feels bad, and it probably is bad, but I think that is a viable option if you're a contrarian player and okay with taking a zero.
Yeah, no, I mean it's definitely, a high risk, high leverage strategy to go under on one or both guys and just like, if only 6% of the field is gonna be live if somehow this fight busts, then I mean that's a lot of real estate to work with. But I will say, Volk's last win was a third round knockout. He scored 136 points.
Yeah,
So I mean
right.
it's gonna have to get weird for a mid round knockout, at least for him. Maybe he could be dominating and Topuria throws up like an early second, early third round submission and scores like, like 90 points. That might be more likely.
Right. And again, this fight is a great example of recognizing your own bias, you, the general you. Whereas me personally, I look at this fight and Jake, you and I were talking beforehand, where I'm always trying to get off the guy before they fall off the cliff. This is in season-long fantasy football. This is in uh, it may be known as the Derrick Henry strategy in season-long fantasy football. Here it's title fighters trying to get off before, especially at high ownership, before they fall off the cliff. And I'm willing to burn my bankroll a bit. Perhaps the past few fights for Volkanovski for that to work. But then also the availability bias that, at least for you and I, Jake, when we're in this and we're charting fighters, you and I got into this from a content creation perspective 2020, and a lot of the guys now that we see in the top of the rankings that have risen up the past few years, we charted them coming into their debut. And these undefeated guys, Topuria, Hamzat, Rachmanov, right, like Shavkat, these guys, like, you have no choice but to internally root for them when you feel like you've been along for their entire career. So myself, I'm trying to put that bias aside and figure out what to do with the situation. So while others may not have that out there, I think this is an important thing just to realize. I mean, you mentioned recency bias, right? That's another bias I think we have to be aware of when we're playing MMA DFS or just DFS in general.
Yeah, I mean that's fair, man. You definitely build a connection. I mean, I remember charting Topuria before he was ever in the UFC and be like, hey man, I think this guy's pretty good.
That's the thing, right? Like that's the thing. We see these guys and we're like, wow, these dudes are legit, right? Because we charge so many fighters, and there we'll get to probably 5 of them here in a second that we're like, these guys have no chance. But when you get those guys like, wow, these people are special. They can win us a lot of money. I mean, you look at the fighters. Like Hamzat has won me 100K. Casey O'Neill in her debut 100K because we do the work, and you don't want to let go of that. So this is a long way of saying that this fight has a lot of biases around it. So just be careful as you are building your lineups. Jake, just really quickly, any final thoughts on the main event before we move on?
I really think Volk wins, man.
I mean, if you're as confident now as you were about the Hyder Emil call last week, which we said 3 different times, Jake said 3 different times. Hopefully, you took advantage of that in last week's video. So great call there. Let's see if Jake can go back to back with the Volk call here. So, all right, moving on. We have 5 fighters making their UFC debut, and we'll go quickly here. Well, we'll talk about their background, strength of schedule, fighting style, what we expect in their debut. Starting with Carlos Vera, who I was telling you earlier, Jake, I had him charted previously, and then his debut was canceled. So fortunately, I didn't have to do any extra work. But unfortunately, I don't really remember much about the guy. So talking about Vera, just really quickly, strength of schedule, fighting style, chances as a plus 800 underdog against Nakamura here.
Older guy, 36 years old, 11-3 with 6 finishes, making his debut, coming off a decision loss on Ultimate Fighter to Brad Katona. It was a 2-round decision. He just got smothered, taken down 4 times on 4 attempts, just controlled for 7 of the 10 minutes in that fight. Couldn't do anything. Just really dominated. And then we got to see Conor McGregor go on a rant about how those should have been 3-round fights because his team lost everyone. So prior to that, Carlos Vera had won 4 straight fights with Fury FC. Last 2 of those came by guillotine, which he loves looking for guillotines. He's also looking for leg locks, which he trains with Ryan Hall up in Falls Church. So it's not surprising that he's constantly going for leg locks. He's actually the striking coach at Ryan Hall's 50/50 gym, just sort of outside DC. 4th degree Taekwondo black belt. But yeah, he's not very good. He's bad wrestling. Lots of like spinning kicks, kind of Taekwondo stuff, but not super high percentage moves. And then he's just throwing up guillotines and leg locks, which are low percentage submission attempts. I mean, how many guys do we get coming off a loss into their UFC debuts? Like, not very many. I think he's filling in on not like short notice, but shorter notice because Brady Heistan was supposed to fight Rinya Nakamura. So I think they just needed a guy, and he was available, and he was on tough, and they like bringing those guys in even when they lose. But yeah, not very impressive and already old, so seems kind of like a finished product. He's just going to be like a low percentage sub, low percentage spinning kicker bust type guy, and yeah, not very impressed by him.
Perfect recipe for DFS. And I got to say, his OF index, which, by the way, if you're not familiar, our Occupy model at OccupyFantasy.com ranks every fighter based on our proprietary formula. One of the lowest OF index scores in the history of the model. So not great. And one of the guys he's competing with for that honor is, let's sort by earliest fight to latest fight, is Val Woodburn, who we will talk about in a second when we get to good fighter, bad fighter. But he is facing Olaf Elliott, who is making his debut, $9,300 favorite here. The Welsh gangster, resume, background, fighting style.
Yeah, I'm not super high on this guy. I don't really care for him that much, but 26-year-old, 9-2 with 5 finishes. He's been knocked out twice. One of those was against Figlak, who got destroyed in his UFC debut like a year and a half ago and fell off the face of the earth. So this guy's coming off a majority decision win on Contender Series, which again, you don't see a ton of those. Like, oh, it was a close decision. Like, he almost got finished in round 2. He almost got knocked out. Then he almost got armbarred. And then the other guy gassed out. And Olaf Elliott came back, won round 3, and then just like made a pitch for why he deserved to get a contract. And Dana like went for it basically. This guy like lays railroad in like Wales. So he's still got like a full-time job. His last 4 fights have all gone the distance after he had a bunch of finishes earlier in his career, but a lot of suspect competition. I don't know. He seems like kind of well-rounded, but also not great anywhere and pretty chinny. He doesn't throw enough volume to really get me excited in DFS, but he'll land takedowns, and he's an okay striker. He just doesn't do quite enough to put up big scores. He's kind of content with coasting at times. He fought at 155 some earlier in his career, which makes me think he's not the biggest guy at 170. And now he's facing a guy coming down from 185 and Val Woodburn, who Val actually fought at 205 once. So at one point they were competing 50 pounds apart, which is kind of odd. I don't know. It seems like, I mean, it's probably a good matchup. Val Woodburn is like probably a complete fraud and like 5'8". He's just like a fire hydrant, and he fought in the Florida regional scene, so he's probably not any good. So theoretically, it's a good matchup for Elliott, but I don't know, man. Elliott is chinny, so I think he's always at risk of getting knocked out, and yeah, I don't know. I'm sort of meh on this guy.
Fair enough. If you're met on Elliott, can I offer you Danny Barlo, who is fighting Josh Quinlan? Left hand to God, Danny Barlo out of Memphis. Background, resume, fighting style for his debut.
Yeah, man. Another guy I'm not super excited about. 28-year-old Danny Barlo. So he's 7-0 with 5 finishes, which all looks good. He's got like 2 decisions, 5 first-round finishes. Coming out of a round 1 KO win on Contender Series against a guy he knew from the regional scene. He only turned pro in October 2021. He can't really wrestle, which we've had limited tape of watching him wrestle, but I saw him get taken down and almost submitted by his 1-0 guy in Barlow's last decision win. And I saw that, I was like, this guy is going to get destroyed on the mat in the UFC if he hasn't gotten dramatically better, because he just got taken down so easily, got his back taken. It was so close to him getting subbed. It was just, he's a BJJ blue belt, and it definitely shows. The guy's really green. He's just like a freak athlete. He's tall, he's long, he's fast, he's strong. He's got a good left hand that he fires right down the pipe straight. But I just don't think that he's got enough experience in fighting to really be at the UFC. They just brought him on because he's a really good athlete, basically. He doesn't throw enough volume, and he doesn't wrestle enough to get me excited in DFS. And I just feel like he's going to struggle on the mat, and he's going to have some growing pains. But yeah, I mean, really good athlete. I mean, I told you, he kind of reminded me of Jamie Pickett, just like a good athlete, long, but, definitely see some holes in his game where I think he's going to struggle against more well-rounded fighters.
Fair enough. So we have Carlos Vera, Oban Elliott, Danny Barlo. Not impressed with any of them. And maybe we're not impressed with these next two guys as actual fighters and longevity in the UFC. But I described this next matchup to you, Jake, as two light heavyweight Terrence McKennas facing off against each other. The model agrees, the betting markets agrees. We have Brenderson Ribeiro and Zhang Ming Yang fighting each other in this fight. The odds are insane for this fight to end in the first round. If you watch 30 seconds of tape on either one, you'll see why. Just give us the rundown.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, maybe they're not great fighters, but this should be a great fight. So we've got Zhang Ming Yang, 25-year-old, 16-6. All 16 of his wins have come in round 1, which I would say is both encouraging, but also a huge red flag when you see guys like this.
Not to mention, really quickly, the two red flags. You may be getting to this. I'm getting ahead of myself. Red flags. Fought in WLF, which we know is the fraudest organization on the planet, and lost to the guy who got kicked out of the UFC for being a fraud for padding and fabricating his record. So
yeah, you're right. Yeah, the Ukrainian guy, whatever his name is.
Yeah,
I don't know. It depends on where you look. You might get a different name, but yeah, no. I mean, you said it like this guy. So this guy, he got a round 1 KO on road to the UFC back in June 2022, but he wasn't even part of the tournament. They do like one-off fights, and he was in one of those one-offs, and he was a massive underdog in that fight, and just came out swinging. Another guy was like, "What the fuck?" He just knocks the guy out. I don't think the other guy was any good either.
No.
But so he hasn't fought in like a year and a half, almost 2 years. I mean, he's just like a really big Chinese guy, kind of a brawler, really strong. His only offense is defense. He's super hittable. He just kind of relies on overpowering really low-level opponents, and that worked on the regional scene with WLF. But he's another BJJ blue belt who I definitely think will struggle on the mat. I mean, they're just bringing in these guys that are good athletes and just hoping they can learn on the job. The fact that this guy's 0-3 in fights that have made it out of the round 1 makes me think he's got bad cardio, but he hasn't been out of the first round in like 6 years or something. So it's really hard to know. Maybe his cardio is okay and he's just a good finisher. I tend to doubt it, but all we can do is speculate there. He seems like a round 1 or bust type of guy, but he comes to bang. He comes to, find finishes or get finished. So that's what we want for DFS. And he's fighting Brenderson Ribeiro. So 27-year-old guy, 15-5 with 15 finishes. So both guys have a 100% finishing rate. Making his UFC debut following a first-round knockout on the Contender Series. He was also a big underdog in that fight. This guy's actually a BJJ brown belt, though. He loves to look for guillotines. He's got like super long arms, like 81-inch reach. He loves to fish for people's necks, look for guillotines, look for chokes. I think he can find some success with that in this fight in terms of grappling against, a blue belt who really looks probably lost in most grappling exchanges. And then Ribeiro also has this reach advantage. He can strike. He's got three straight first round knockouts. He got knocked out back to back fights in the first round before that. So it's another kill or be killed type of fighter. So honestly, there's so much upside this fight. It almost makes me wonder, like, how does this fight bust? Because it seems like it can't. It's one of those
Well,
fights where like, oh, well, it has to end in round one. So
yeah.
somehow it's gonna, yeah,
I mean, both guys would have to like freeze in the moment, right? Because I haven't seen a fight, and I found as much Chinese footage as possible on Chinese internet of Zhang Mingyang. The dude's never not throwing. He's never defending, and you could just go over to the Brazilian internet and see the same thing for Ribeiro. It's mirror images of two guys. I mean, to me, it seems like okay, they're gonna be. I assume high ownership for both these guys in large field.
yeah. I think they're gonna be pretty high, but the fact that they're both debuting and that they both have upside. Sometimes it's like a paralysis by analysis type deal with the field where they'll want to play both sides, but they also won't want to play 50% of each fighter. So
Yeah.
I think that they're both going to be like 30-ish or a little bit under there. And based on the line moving in Ribeiro's favor, where he opened the week at 1 plus 120, now he's like even money. I think that's going to drive some more of the ownership towards his side because now he's technically underpriced and Zhang is overpriced slightly.
I think that's fair. And this is the type of fight I think small field contest. We already talked about playing one main event. I think you play one of these guys in all of your small field, whether it's 50-50, 60-40, whatever it is. Very good chance you get 90 plus points from that spot. We're just building small field lineups here for you right in the video. So keep taking notes. We'll continue to try to do that. All right, Jake, those are the 5 fighters making their debut. Let's play good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. These fighters have less than 4 fights in the UFC. We're just going to give some context to their stats with a very quick game. So, again, we'll start with the first fight of the night until the last fight of the night. Val Woodburn, who you can't even use his debut in any charting because it lasted 30 seconds up a weight class on like 3 days' notice. So, Val Woodburn, I believe you said he's bad from the Florida regional scene. But I think you think this might be a good matchup for one of the lower owned fighters on the card.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely bad, and it's concerning that he's dropping down from 185 to 170 for the first time. But he actually came in underweight, which was weird. I was not expecting that. He weighed in 169 and a half, so a pound and a half under the actual limit, which I guess that's probably a good sign. I mean, the guy's only 5'8", but he's literally just fire hydrant of a man, which like was why we thought he wasn't going to get stubbed in his debut, and he didn't get stubbed.
You
He
were
got
right.
immediately knocked out. You can't count it. Um, yeah, but you got to call him bad. Like he's shown bad cardio. Like he's been facing the worst guys at Combat Night in like Tallahassee down in Florida. Like just a joke of a promotion. But he's got power. He has to have power. Like look at the guy. If he has anything, he has power, and he's going against a chinny guy. So yeah, man, I think at 4% ownership on a slate where we're desperate for low owned plays, you have to be over the field on Val Woodburn, and he probably just gets destroyed in this fight. Like guys that have cut down 15 pounds have not fared well in their next fight. I think they're like 0 and 12 over the last 2 years or something. So they're due.
Well, they're definitely due. And the nice thing, 4% ownership, I mean, that means you can literally play him in 1 out of every 10 lineups, and you're 2.5 times the field. So just keep that in
Yeah,
mind as you're building. All right, next we have Josh Quinlan. Good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup.
man. So Quinlan's a little bit weird, right? He got suspended for steroids right after his Contender Series knockout win, and then he was out for a year. And he comes in, he knocks out Jason Witt. Like, okay, get in line. Like everyone's knocked out Jason Witt, and then he comes back and he loses to a short notice debut in fighter in Trey Waters, and he loses badly. Like he lost a decision. He had never even been to the judges before. He loses his first career decision, but it wasn't even like competitive. I mean, it wasn't a good look, but he did look to wrestle. He shot for 8 takedowns. He only landed one of them. But Trey Waters is 6'5", like massive human being, tough to get down. So just the fact that he was looking to wrestle is encouraging. So I'm not going to call him a good fighter because like earlier in his career, he's getting a bunch of knockouts, but he got popped for steroids. So I mean, it's sort of a red flag. Oh, you knocked a bunch of guys out. Oh, you were also on steroids, and now you're not knocking guys
Right.
out in your last fight. Okay, but he's a black belt, and he's going against the blue belt, and I just think it's a good matchup for him because I think Quinlan is going to wrestle. He said he's got his wrestling coach and his jujitsu coaches, two different coaches in his corner. He's coming off his first loss where he looked to wrestle. And I think he's going to say, like, okay, here's another good matchup for me to wrestle. I'm the shorter guy, shorter length, but I'm a black belt. This guy's a blue belt. I have more experience. I have all of my grappling coaches with me. I think he's going to come in with a wrestling heavy game plan, and maybe he fails again. Maybe he goes 1 for 8 again. But I think the potential for him to wrestle is there, and I think he could get a submission. I think he could win a wrestling heavy decision. So I don't know if he's a good fighter, but I do think it's a good matchup.
At somewhat lower ownership too, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was really high owned. He was like 47% owned in his last fight, but it was because he was coming off a massive first round knockout in his debut and he was going against the short notice debuter. So it's always tricky to project that ownership when you're like, well, how much is he going to drop? But I think he's going to drop a lot. I think it's going to be the low 20s, but just realize he has been popular in the past. So you could argue that the field got burned, or you could argue that the field has liked this guy in the past, and maybe he comes in higher than we think. But I think he's going to come in significantly lower than in past fights.
Fair enough. All right, moving on. We have Renan Nakamura, biggest favorite on the card, minus 1250 the last time I looked. Good or bad? We've already established that this is a good matchup versus Carlos Vera.
Yeah, he's up to the negative 1400 at MGM. This guy's good. He's definitely like a young prospect, still learning on the job, 8-0. Like he went to a decision. I think people are going to be a little bit lower on him because he went to a decision in his last fight against Fernie Garcia. And we just saw last week Fernie Garcia got absolutely destroyed and finished. But I think that could actually maybe help a little bit and slightly lower Nakamura's ownership, because people will be like, well, he only scored 85 last time when everyone was on him. He couldn't finish Fernie, who just got finished. So you got some recency bias there. And there's a lot of other options. He's the most expensive fighter in the card. I think he's good, and I think it's a good matchup. And I think we get a slight discount. Like, he's still going to be like 40% owned, but he won't be 50% owned like he would have been if he had scored 120 against Fernie.
We'll take all the discounts we can get, no matter how big or small, on a card of this size. Next, we have Junior Tafa stepping in on 20 minutes notice today. Junior the Juggernaut Tafa. Is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup against Josier de Lima?
Yeah, he literally weighed in the final 10 minutes of weigh-ins. After the last person weighed in, I was watching to see if they were going to put the scale away. I was like, oh, they're not putting it away. They must be doing this fight after all, because I was getting rumored. Yeah, Junior's – so he's like a good striker, but he's probably one of the worst grapplers on the roster, and he has terrible cardio, and now he's stepping in on a day's notice. So early knockout or bust. I mean, I would call that a bad fighter. Some people might look at that and be like, oh, well, the upside makes him good. But he's so bad on the mat, and he's just like disinterested in even trying to grapple. So I think he's a bad fighter. I think it's a bad matchup because we've seen De Lima come in with very wrestling heavy game plans and dominate guys on the mat for 15 minutes. And it sets up perfectly for that to happen here.
Bad cardio, bad takedown defense, bad grappling. Never heard a better recipe for success in my life. Jake, I think that is it, right? No more fighters, less than 4 fights. I think we're good, right? Okay, cool. All right. Yep. Before we get to the end of the show, which we will have our favorite underdog play of the week, fight that you have to target in DFS. You could probably figure it out by now. And our stream parlay of the week. You don't want to miss that. Really quickly, this show is sponsored by Occupy Fantasy, MMADFS.com, and Underdog Fantasy. MMADFS.com is Jake's site where you can get the sheet every single week where he breaks down every fight from a betting and DFS perspective, has premium content for betting and DFS. Make sure you go check it out. You want the full rundown for all your MMA needs. OccupyFantasy.com is where you can get the tools and articles for DFS for DraftKings and FanDuel. Our Occupy model ranks every fighter, FanDuel, and DraftKings with projected ownership from Jake's site. Our plug that Jake writes has top plays, best bets that are still left in the betting market, and lineup construction tips, I would say the most important part of the plug, and our lineup builder, the tool that allows you to build up to 300 lineups on FanDuel and DraftKings. All right, and as I said, sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code OCCUPY to get a 100% deposit match bonus if you have not signed up already, up to $100. So you can use that, deposit 100, get 100, play best ball, or use some of the plays that Jake gives out. So Jake, speaking of that, what is your favorite Underdog Fantasy play for this UFC slate?
Yeah, I think Whitaker over 14.9 minutes makes sense. He hasn't finished anybody since 2017. Like, yeah, he just got knocked out, but you know, it was against the current champion now. So, I mean, I think you have to like that on a pick'em site, you know, going the distance.
For sure. I haven't talked to you about this fight. Who do you like? I assume you like Whitaker to win this in a decision since you are betting that?
Yeah, Yeah, right. I mean, Costa's the KO or bust. So if I like Costa, I probably wouldn't be giving out Whitaker over 14.9. Yeah, man, I'm still on Whitaker. I don't hold one fight against these fighters. Same deal with Volk. Like, I don't hold that one fight. Same deal with Whitaker. I mean, he lost to Duplessis. It happens. Duplessis has been beating everyone. I think it's a good bounce back spot for Whitaker. Costa hasn't fought in forever. The bigger octagon helps Whitaker to stay safe, stay out of danger with the knockouts. I think Whitaker's going to be smart, patient, pick Costa apart. Costa's going to slow down. Whitaker wins the decision.
Fair enough. All right, when we talk about fights to target in DFS, obviously the main event comes to mind. I think we've already professed our love for the debuting matchup between Zhang and Ribeiro. I assume that's the fight you're looking to target. Is there anything else maybe under the radar, or is that the fight you're just going to give the people?
Should just throw you a curveball one day and be like, nope, it was Andrea Lee and Miranda Maverick.
I mean,
But
well, if we're looking for a GPP fight that you have to target, that one for ownership reasons is probably it.
I mean, it probably is, but I was gonna give out the Zhang and Ribeiro fight. I mean, that's the no brainer. If you want to be super heavy on both sides, whether you're building three lineups or 150, I think that's the fight, man. It's any fight can bust, but this is gonna be outside of the main event the hardest for any fight to bust.
Fair enough. All right, let's do our stream parlay of the week. We almost hit it last week. We hit it 2 weeks ago. I give a side, total, or prop. Jake does as well. We parlay it together and we buy a vehicle with it. This will be the sub special, sub parlay of the week. And given what we think Zhang's weaknesses are in his striking defense, but also on the mat, I have to go Ribeiro, who as the line moves towards him, I have to feel like his method to win by submission is probably underpriced given their credentials. So I'll go Ribeiro by sub plus 600.
Yeah, I really like that. I just want to say I feel like we kind of got robbed on the Wells decision
Yes.
last week. It was
Yes.
a close, bad fight, but that's what it came down to. You got the Prates KO. I had the Wells decision, and we lost the split decision for the 638 parlay, but we hit the 1160 the week before. Anyways, totally not bitter. I'm gonna go with Anthony Fluffy Hernandez by submission at plus 200. I would have given out the round two or round three submission that I gave out earlier in the week at plus 450, but that was down to plus 390 earlier. So at that point, might as well go back to sub, which interestingly, the anytime sub didn't move at all. So everyone's betting the late subs, which all of his subs are late, but I mean, due for a first round one. So a little bit safer here with the anytime sub. So yeah, anytime sub parlay, Ribeiro sub, Fluffy sub. It's going to be 20 to 1 when you parlay those two together.
20 to 1. Those of you looking for long shot parlays, 20 to 1. Ribeiro by sub, Hernandez by sub. Seems pretty good to me. Just really quickly on Hernandez, we expect him to be popular. Dvalishvili is going to be popular. Obviously, the main event sounds like Nakamura you have is popular as well. Of all those fighters, Jake, if you had to pick one to be completely underweight on in tournaments, who do you think has the highest chance of busting?
So I think it's so my favorite play of the three is Hernandez, but he's also the most likely of the three to lose. So it's a little bit of a tricky question because if any of them are gonna like get finished, it's gonna be Kopylov knocking out Hernandez. But in terms of highest chance of busting, all things considered, I kind of think Marab, it's not the best spot. I think it's a tougher spot for him to land takedowns. Traditionally or historically, Segudo hasn't absorbed a ton of strikes. So I could see it being more similar, like the Aldo or the Dotson fights for Marab, where he still wins, he still scores pretty well, but he doesn't have one of these nuclear performances, which he's had two of his last three fights. He scored over 160 points. So I automatically like just want to be lower on him just because I feel like people are going to see those scores and feel like they have to play him because of that. But yeah, I mean, it seems like a tougher matchup for him to find a ton of wrestling success or even a ton of striking. But no, I mean, I'm still on Marab winning. I just don't know if he scores above 100 points. I could see him scoring like 90 and getting left out. I also think Nakamura could potentially ride out a decision on the mat. Potentially. I mean, he probably gets the sub. He probably gets the finish. But he could ride out a decision on the mat similar to the last one. He just doesn't land enough ground strikes to pay off at 9,600. So I think all the guys, like, you can kind of poke holes in any of them for not necessarily even losing, but just how they don't return value, which is good if we're trying to only play one of them to avoid two.
Yeah, and if you have your notepad still out, Marab and Smallfield, right? Very high floor, likely to win. And if he glows nuclear, you probably need to have them anyways. So, and you're probably going to be under in large field. So why not get the advantage in small field? So, Jake, we basically built lineups for people on this show. So good luck to those who always ask us for lineups. So that'll do it for this video. We appreciate you watching as always. Went a little lengthy. Let us know what you think about the length of the video. Comment below. Do you like these longer videos? Do you like the live streams? We love to hear from you. So comment below. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them as well. Discord is the best place for that to happen. occupyfantasy.com/discord. Instructions to join are in the description below. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel here on YouTube. It is free to do so by clicking the subscribe button. That'll get you notified whenever we go live, upload any UFC DFS videos or other DFS videos. We're doing these every time there is a pay-per-view or 12 or more fights on the card. Subscribing is the best way to get notified if we upload it Friday night or we go live Saturday afternoon. One final request, give us that thumbs up. We appreciate that as well. Show your support for the channel in a very quick and free way. So, Jake, follow him on Twitter at DFS_MMA. I'm at Brian Jesser FF, as well as at Occupy Fantasy. Thank you for listening, and good luck at UFC 298.